and thinks that he could have succeeded if the others would have seen the end of the whole war.
You mean the other leaders in Germany?
No, the leaders in England. It's well known that really Hitler wanted to have peace with England, with the United Kingdom, but under his conditions, and his conditions were that he is guaranteeing the empire with the German armed forces, and on the other hand that the British give him free hand on the continent.
Mm-hmm.
And if he would have succeeded, I'm convinced that Hess would have been received by Hitler as a great hero of Germany.
A month later,
in a very short time, I had an organization of about 8,000 or 10,000 industrialists and technicians who were handling the whole thing to the last detail. And this worked fine, you know. And this change made the increase of production. It was not me who did it. I had just the idea. I tried to get as much experience as possible, and I was on the test fields, and it was, well, it was some kind of relaxation, I must confess, after all the worries I had in my office to be now somewhere and to make tests with. That was just good fun. True, what always is told, that I was a boss of the slave laborers. I wasn't, because we have had in Germany a few million slave laborers, and only about, not only, but 30% of them were working in my factories, and the others were working in other fields which were not in my responsibility. This fact was dealt thoroughly during the Nuremberg trial, and I was saying that I feel responsible for that I ordered from Saugel, who was a plenipotentiary for working for workers, for labor, as much workmen which were coming to Germany against their own will, and that I am responsible for it. But there was no doubt during the whole trial that the man who was responsible for slave labor, for their nourishment, for their clothes, for the barracks where they were living in, and for coming to Germany, was Saugel himself.
But you must have known about the conditions under which these people worked, and you were in a position to act on their behalf. You could have insisted that the conditions, the food, clothing, were improved.
This was, even when I was not responsible, we, that means industrialists and my ministry, felt that it's necessary to have enough clothing, to have sufficient nourishment, and there was enough proof during Nuremberg trial, which led to another sentence in my judgment, that I was succeeding in giving the workmen, the deported workmen, better food and better working conditions.
Why did you commit yourself so thoroughly to still maintaining as high a level of armaments production as you possibly could? Would the war not have been shortened if armaments production had been limited?
This is one of the biggest reproaches to my activities, that I prolongated the war possibly with my activities for 1 or 2 years. And of course, that is the truth. It was not with me only, but with my whole organization. They prolongated it. But also then, this whole fight to the end, to 45, gets in some way, possibly some sense. Wedemeyer, the chief of staff of the Americans for a while, he wrote just a hint, is not very much in his memoirs, that he is afraid of a collapse of the German troops in 42. Because if Germany would have collapsed in 42 or in 43, you weren't ready. And Russians would have infiltrated in Europe certainly much more than they did then in 45. And he said to me, no, you are not right. The German people has no right to survive. I will destroy everything. And he gave orders to destroy the industry, to destroy the water plants, to destroy the electric power stations, and so on and so on. It would have meant the end of civilized life in Germany for quite a long time.
This peaceful and prosperous scene bears very little resemblance to the Germany at the end of the war. Speer realized that Hitler's scorched earth policy was monstrous. And so he set out on one of the most bizarre journeys of his spectacular career, following a calculated plan to see that Hitler's orders were disobeyed.
I must say, quite many of the Gau leaders, of the political leaders of Hitler, saw that it is nonsense in this situation to do such a thing. And so I went around in West and East Germany. In East Germany we prevented the destruction too, and in Poland too. And to convince them that the war is lost, there's no more any chance. And Hitler himself, he was deteriorating too in his clothes were smudged with stains, and nobody cared about to clean them, and he looked miserable. He looked like a very old man. He aged for years and years in a few weeks. The 2 days before the death of Hitler and of her, she was quite amiable to me, and I had a longer chat, and then I really started to admire her, because in my opinion, in this bunker she was the only reasonable human being.
The others? Joseph Goebbels would kill himself, his wife, and their 6 children.
He was a fanatic. It's typical for him that he had such an idea. I never understood that Frau Goebbels was so subdued to her husband, because she had no reason, because she betrayed her. He betrayed her very often. He was not a faithful companion of her life. But she just said, well, that is how it shall be. When I was in the Chancellery and I had said farewell to Hitler, and I was then alone, I went in the court of honor which I had built in '38. One had the gunfire now and then, and there I said farewell to my main work as an architect, and this was the end of what I thought was my productive life. You must be quite aware that this man who wrote the books can't be compared with this man who was living until spring '45. Because in those 20 years in Spandau, the first time in my life, I could occupy my mind with everything which in our world is valuable in literature. Not only all the novels, and but also the books of psychoanalysts from Freud, Adler, Jung, and so on, and the book of historians and biographies of important people, and this enabled me to see the whole thing from another point of view. So if it's not justified to say how this man Speer, who wrote those books, was able to follow Hitler, because it's another man. Then, of course, power is sweet, and to gain power and to possess power, to send to leave it is very difficult, and one sees this in politics with old politicians like de Gaulle and Adenauer. They were wise people, but they suffered from the same mental illness.
After 20 years, the puzzle of Albert Speer was still unsolved. 10 years later, Speer went back to that hotel with me. We talked first of Spandau's last prisoner, the strange Rudolf Hess. Would he be capable of surviving if, by some miracle, he was released now at the age of 82 or 83?
I'm sure he would, because his family is intact too, and this is the main thing, and I know where he would live, in the mountains, and there is his room already prepared for him.
The popular opinion of Hess, I think, in North America is that he is crazy. Is he crazy?
Not at all, in my opinion. And he was checked so often by psychoanalysts of the armies of the French and American, British and Russian during his Spandau time, and all the reports were saying that he is not insane, and this was our opinion too.
But he still believes that everything that the Third Reich did was correct and that Hitler was the world's greatest leader.
Well, that is, he is still mesmerized or convinced of Hitler, and I think this gives him a support to stay with the conviction that Hitler is the greatest man of Europe, or he doesn't say Hitler, he says the Führer is the greatest man of Europe, and to go on with this being now the deputy of Hitler.
Speer has tried without success to visit Hess in Spandau, but he's been back to the prison only once, for this film. I remember from the diaries you're reading the report of a British Royal Commission on Crime and Punishment, which said after 9 years in prison, a person is permanently damaged. At that point, you had been in prison 11 years. Did you feel that you had been permanently changed?
There was no damage done to me. I passed a very thorough medical examination by the professor for internal in Heidelberg University, and all his assistant professors, they were doing some curious things, and the result was that the professor said, you, with your 20 years of prison, you are a medical miracle to me, because nothing is wrong with you.
Did that include psychological and neurological testing?
No, not. I didn't need it, I thought.
When we talked in your home in Heidelberg a month ago, and you described your background and your education, the romanticism of the boy exploring the ruins in Heidelberg, the effect of the First World War, the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty, the technical narrowness of your education, and the stress on obedience and loyalty throughout all of your formation as a human being. You seem to me to be saying, these were the conditions that made me what I am, and that made me do the things that I did. And yet at Nuremberg, you said, I'm guilty, I'm responsible. There's a conflict there. Which is it? Were you, in fact, personally responsible, or were you compelled by events?
When I made my statement in Nuremberg before the tribunal, said I don't only feel responsible for everything which happened in my ministry, but that I feel a general responsibility for everything which happened after I entered the government in February 42. Then I thought first that it's a kind of a duty. I was ashamed that all the others who were before me in the dock, like Göring or Keidel or Ribbentrop, all didn't say a word about responsibility. And in my opinion, there is really a responsibility of a member of a government for everything which happens. He really has to care about what is going on around him, and he can't shun away afterwards and say, well, it was an authoritarian system.
You were